Ebony Rainford Brent, Jimmy Anderson alongside me, and we're going to talk a little bit about preparation for a World Cup, how you get it right, how you peak at the right time, all those sorts of things. It was part of a very successful year for the England women's side in 2009. Multiple World Cup winners, 50 over T20. I mean, peaking at the right time is the great challenge for any captain, coach, all those things. How do you go into a World Cup year and make sure you're getting it right?
Yeah, I think there's... I think actually when I joined the England side, we were in a cycle where actually when I joined the team, we, for about 2 years before, were underperforming badly, were struggling. A bit like the men's team did in 2015 around rebuilding after Bangladesh. Actually, I remember us being in India at the end of a 4 quadrangular series with Australia, India, England, New Zealand, and we got battered. And that was a sort of drawing point of, okay, we've got a World Cup in 18 months' time. What do we do? So I think the first thing I was going to say, actually, is the planning doesn't start imminently or just a couple of games away. There's a bit of work in the background to say, where do we need to be as a side? For us, I think we need to be more dominant, more smarter. We needed more options, and everybody had to start going through and really working out what everybody's role was. So I think there's a bit of thinking that needs to be done before. But then there's that sort of, you don't want to peak too early as well. So you have to then invest in a period of making sure you've got the right game proing, the right game plan. For me, for example, as a player at that stage, my spin was weak. So I'd spend times in the winter going over to places like India to work on that. I went to a few camps. The England side had a few camps. Isha would go over there a lot on bowl. Just working on different areas of the game. So everybody has their individual game plan, but I think it is vital that you kind of decide what sort of style do we need to, and then peaking towards that key moment of the tournament, you need to start seeing incremental improvements. So, that is vital. I think a lot of that comes down to management, the captain, to decide the brand, the style. Then as a player, you have to see your purpose and role within that. I was never the gun player. I wish if I was, but I was never the gun player. I was always the kind of backup to Sarah Taylor, Claire Taylor in that top order. So it was important I got enough game time. So a bit like we're seeing here, you'd see rotation of squads in the head and build up. That's kind of what England are going through at this moment, is going, okay, what if Sarah Taylor got injured at that key moment? Will Ebony be prepped and ready to go and set in and establish herself? So then you would get these games where the team was changing in the build-up, so that I could have clarity on my role. The openers could, the bowlers could. So I think there's a lot of thinking that goes in the build-up that makes it quite fun. And I have to say, from being in the same team that was getting battered to one that gets it right, it's quite, you can see the mindset shift as well that takes place once you get that clarity in the squad.
Jimmy Anderson, you're part of the 2010 T20 World Cup squad in the Caribbean, and it's funny when you look at the successful England squads in World Cups and more universally, you think of 2015 when there were changes made. Alistair Cook left out of the squad at quite late notice and replaced by Owen Morgan as captain. Gary Ballance played in the side, no Ben Stokes. So there's all that chopping and changing, and England struggled in that tournament. But then you go back to 2010 and then Craig Kieswetter was brought in and everything was shifted around quite late, and it worked really well. So what is do you need a settled squad? What's the right way of going into it?
Well, I think it's getting that formula, like Ebony just said. I think going into the 2010 World Cup in the West Indies, there might have been changes, but there was definitely everyone was clear on their roles. It was a settled sort of group. I think we probably just used the 11 players throughout the tournament, I think. So it was, I think it was just a case of obviously having players in form, which you need in a big tournament, and I think having them settled in the position. So even bringing Kieswetter in, knowing that he's going to open the batting for the whole tournament, like that, and Michael Lum, I think, was at the top of the order as well. And it just, just having that clarity, I think, around it. Because, I mean, you're talking about the 50 over World Cups. I've played in 4, I think, 2003, 7, 11 and 15. And I honestly think that we never gave the World Cup enough focus. We played, Test cricket was the sort of real focus of the England team around then. In those years, and because I remember as a bowler, myself and Stuart Broad, would play in a Test series and then potentially get rested from the one day series, which usually followed on from a Test series. So I didn't think we gave the World Cups the sort of the attention that they needed. And then I think the shift came not just in 2015 after that World Cup, when there was a shift in captain and actual direction that the one day team wanted to go. I think it was the changing of the Ashes. So when 2003 we played an Ashes series straight to South Africa for the World Cup. 2007 straight to the West Indies for a World Cup after the Ashes, and then 2011 pretty much straight to India after an Ashes series. And 5 Test matches in Australia is tough going, and especially when there was only one successful one out of those 3.
And particularly at a time where actually the bowling unit was largely the same between the 2 squads.
Yeah,
well.
the crossover of players was quite big, so there was a lot of Test players would be in that one day side, that World Cup squad. So I think that shift, and I think it was 13-14 was the when that got shifted, because it was meant to be a 14-15 Ashes series, I think.
Yeah, because there was a 2 really close back, summer, winter, wasn't there?
And I think that gives you then the when it means you don't have 2 massive series sort of back to back. And then obviously the next big shift for us was the actual shift in personnel and making the 2 teams slightly separate. Now we see separate coaches, white ball, red ball. I think that's been hugely important and allows you to get into the right frame of mind as a team to put full focus into how that team wants to play and how you prepare for a big tournament.
I mean, we've got to the stage now where you might have an England Test side and an England white ball side playing on the same day in different parts of the world. I mean, it's shifted enormously in the last 10 years.
Yeah, massively. I think the amounts of cricket that takes place now, and also I guess the benefit of England changing their brand and kind of imprinting that all the way down into domestic cricket is that more and more players wanted to play that style. Therefore, they're now blessed with a number of players that can deliver on the white ball as well as go to your red ball specialist. So I think the men's game is much further ahead in having depth of players. I think we're seeing that emerging better for the women's. I think back in the day, once you're in England, you're playing any format that's available, whereas now you're starting to see that niche between different formats. But it's definitely key. I think the other thing, I was wondering what Jimmy does actually, because as a batter, I started getting involved in the era where you get more and more data, video of different players. For me, for example, I remember facing Perry, and you watch your footage, or Shelley Nitschke was a left arm spinner, which I wasn't always the best at, and so you watch it and then craft your own plans, and you have to do that sometimes ahead of time and then look at your ABC. So I spent a bit of time as a batter just thinking through all the players that were some I didn't worry about, but there will be some that I think I need a plan here. And spend a lot of time ahead of that. And you'd work with coaches and other key people around you to say, okay, what is going to be my strategy? So I don't know how you go about it. Do you go player by player, or do you just focus on your own game when you're building up to a key series?
Well, I just think that there's so much cricket now that most players don't need to do that. I don't. I'll definitely look at a few players that I've not played against much. But generally it's focusing on me and what my strength is and trying to hone in on that, basically. And I think a lot of players are similar, certainly in the Test team. I know that the guys will look at the batters will look at bowlers that they might not face too much, see if there's anything they can pick up on. But generally you can't. I think the data. I mean, this is going off on a different. Yeah. We could go off on a different
go on.
Sort of tangent here, but I feel like you can get too
bogged down.
And overloaded with information. I think. The beauty, when I started playing cricket, one of the skills of a bowler is working a batter out in the middle.
Yeah.
When you're out there, someone you might never have seen before, I think that's a real skill, being able to see a weakness, pick up on a weakness while you're actually in the battle. And I think that's sort of been taken away from players with, all these
matchups,
all the matchups and the information you get given, and the captain saying, right, this is what I want you to bowl to this guy. Whereas actually the bowler might think, I'm not feeling that today. This is my strength. My strength's a Yorker, wide Yorker, so I'm going to go to that. So it's, you know what I mean? It's like I think sometimes you can get slightly overloaded.
And it
with
can be too prescriptive, and you get too much information. I can totally imagine that, because if you're from a batting point of view, Ebony, if you have all this information about a bowler who actually comes into a game and is trying something completely different, and you're just asking for trouble. I mean, being forewarned for information is really useful, of course, but you don't want to be too sort of.
I think some is personality driven, and then others is the standard I got to as a player. You know, I was an average England player versus maybe if you spoke to some of the best, they might have more of that sort of mindset where they go into feel. I think actually that is when you play at your best, actually you often aren't overthinking all of these parts of it, whereas because I was always tinkering, trying to make sure you get in the game, I was looking at everything. If the coach gave me a stat pack, I'm on it. I'm like, okay. So I think there's that. I think the other is personality as well. You know, I remember Claire Taylor, who in that World Cup that summer that we dominated the T20 World Cup, she was very formulaic actually in how she would create her plans, and it was almost mathematical. She came from quite a maths-based background. She loved the stats, the data. She would think about her areas and her zones very clinically. And I remember trying that. It maybe didn't quite work with my style as much, but I tried to soak it up. So I think some of it is individual. But the interesting thing for me is there's been times where we've been told, for example, on this wicket, the average score is X. And in women's cricket, if you get to that, you win. And I remember being at a game where halfway stage, we'd passed that by 10 runs, and we were like, well, average score says you always win. And then we got hammered or beaten in like 40 overs, and you think, okay, well, the stats don't work. Or you get given a match-up sheet, and it shows you all the areas are red, which means the player can score in every zone. So the data's not providing any insight, because you're looking at it and it's just basically going, don't bowl short, don't bowl full.
Yeah.
You can't do much. So I think there is a niche, and all of these factors in a build-up to World Cup are key. You know, you've got to work out your style on how you're going to get the best out of yourself. So I think data can help, but I agree, actually, you've got to stay away from getting completely taken down it, because sometimes data can just actually not provide you anything meaningful for the contest.
One thing that struck me, I remember after the successful World Cup that the England women's side had in 2017, they all almost handed their phones in, all off social media for the entire period of the tour. That really worked for them. It was a sort of team unity thing, which was, right, we're kind of going to close ourselves off a little bit from the outside noise and win this in our own way. How important is it when you're going to a major series? It could be a test series, it could be a World Cup, Jimmy, that you have that sense of team unity. Everybody knows each other well enough and you're pulling in the right direction. Or can you develop that very quickly when you come together as a group?
Well, I think you're always striving for that as a team. You're always striving for that unity, and you know, no matter whether you've got a big tournament coming up or you know, it's just another series. I think you're always striving to get as tight as you can as a group, because you know it's pretty well known, I think, that if you have that, you've got a better chance of being successful on the field. When the team gels together well, everyone knows each other's strengths and weaknesses. You can help each other out on and off the field, and I think that that's something that you're always striving for. And it's not something that I don't think you can just sort of knit it together in a week.
No.
You know, before a tournament. I think
that
it does take a bit of time to bed in, and I think that happened in after the 2015 World Cup. I think that it took a bit of time. Sort of the strategy that they wanted to, the way they wanted to play, and also the players getting used to it and coming together as a group. I think that took a little bit of time just to bed in.
But is that not a worry for England going into this World Cup, given the fact, and Zoltz has got some stats on this, I'm sure, given the fact that there isn't been quite that consistency of selection just by the nature of the game and how 50-over cricket has been looked at?
Yeah, and I think the other thing I was going to add in as well is sometimes you gel when everything is clicking and you're working. So, for example, for us, we went on this run of 18 games in the build-up to the World Cup that we won. So spirits are high.
Yeah.
They're always high when you're winning. And then the minute there's a crack or there's an injury. And so I think with this side, for example, Jason Roy's been out for a little bit. Johnny Bairstow, Harry Brooks had a little look in. So things might be a bit clunky. They didn't win that last game where they might have thought they would with 290 on the board. And so then actually I find that team spirit can tank in a couple of losses. Like, it can go from being really well organised to, unless you've got a good captain and good coach. So that is key.
Yeah, I just think, I think it's more potentially more important when you've got a little bit of inexperience in the group. And I think this England team is, loaded with experience.
Yeah.
So many players that have been there. A lot of them have been involved in 2 World Cup wins. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. The fact that they have been out for a bit. I think that one of the bigger problems is they're only playing 40-odd games since the last World Cup. We talked the other day about from 2015, which was pretty average at best. There was 80-odd, I think, before
88,
that.
I think.
Yeah,
it was,
to that 2019 World Cup. So that's when you can get some momentum and that sort of unity that we're talking about, and getting to know the game plan and the strategy and stuff like that. So I think that this time round, it's lucky that England have got the experience they have, because I think that those players will stand up when it comes to the big tournament, the big games that they're going to have to win to win that World Cup. I think the likes of Joe Root, Ben Stokes, Jos Buttler, Bairstow, Roy, they've all been there and done that. They've got plenty of experience, and I think that hopefully from an England point of view will drag everyone else along.
Well, yeah, they're showing on the big screen the World Cup final from 4 years ago. Is 2 things you notice: one, how young everyone looks, and also the fact that there is an awful lot of that England side from that time that remains the same and part of the squad. So, Andy, what have you got for us?
Yeah, just on this issue of sort of consistency of selection, and you mentioned the build up to that World Cup in 2019, 88 games. They had 6 players who'd played in over 80% of those games, another 5 who'd played in more than 60%, and another 2, Willie and Mark Wood, who were around about the 50% mark. So the entire core of the first choice 11 in that World Cup had played a huge amount of one-day cricket and played a huge amount together. They played almost all their games, had at least 8 or 9 of that World Cup squad playing together in that team. In this current cycle, since the last World Cup, they've now played 37 games. Only 1 player, Jason Roy, has played more than 80% of those games. Only 3 more have played more than 60%. Last time, as I said, we had 11 players who played over 60% of the games. So not only have they played a lot less generally, but the players who are in the World Cup squad have played a lot less together, even in that reduced number of games. Now, as Jimmy said, a factor in that is that they do have this experience, so it might be, you'd expect them to click more than a newer team, but at the same time, there may be an element of rustiness that takes a little while to come good.
Which presumably most teams will find, because 50 over cricket around the world, if England aren't playing 50 over matches, it's more likely other teams aren't as well, and that's been the case.
Andy showed the other day the one team, was it 55 India had played? So India had played quite a few games, and they're playing at home. In that sense, I think it gives them a little bit of an edge, actually. They've played significantly more games. They're in their own conditions. Obviously, they're going to have to deal with, which I suppose they're used to by these days, with the media and the expectation. But equally, I think they're playing significantly more, even though they haven't necessarily won a huge amount more, I don't think. But they've played more, right?
Yeah, India's played 57 matches since the last World Cup. That's up to the end of August. So I think that was what I was looking up at the start of the series. They played a couple more in Asia Cup since then. Slightly ironically, the team that's played most one-day international cricket since the last World Cup, India's now played 60. West Indies have also played 60, and they didn't qualify, and had a terrible qualifier.
Maybe that's their problem. They played too much.
Yeah.
Do we overanalyze these things and try and come up with a narrative that...
Yeah.
Yes, particularly when it's raining. We need to find stuff to talk about. I think it's something you can definitely overanalyze. I don't think anyone, that's the nature of our job, my part-time job, is to talk about these things and analyse them. But I think from the team's point of view, the important thing is they focus on that dressing room and what they do out on the field, and try and block everything else out, all the people's opinions and stuff like that.
What about social media? Because you're not a big tweeter or whatever, but you must pick up when you're in the dressing room? Actually, you would have seen what was going on in the papers or the news. Yeah,
so I try to not look at anything during a series because I think it's... I just don't think it's healthy to even looking at good stuff. You sort of can get a little bit ahead of yourself and think, I'm doing really well here. Yeah. And similarly, you can hear a lot of on the other side of it, some bad stuff as well. But there are players in that dressing room that look at everything, that read everything, and if they don't, their family tell them, have you seen what he's written about you, or she said this about you. And then there's some that, like Zach Crawley, for example, is not on social media at all, which I think is really, really good. It's really good for him, and I think I'm not sure he'd have come through the last couple of years if he had been on social media. So I think it's an individual thing, but I prefer not to. The less noise in there, the better. You know when you've played well. You know when the team's played well. You know when you've played badly. I think you've got to try and look at it quite objectively and analyse your performances individually and as a team, and do that without listening to outside influences.
In that respect, England could almost do with having the squad, getting to India, and right, let's just
Switch
enough
off.
of this. Who's going to potentially come in? Is Harry Brook going to force his way? All of this stuff that we love talking about, and it creates a narrative for the fans as well, and gives a little bit more context to these matches. But actually, once they know the squad, they're out there, they can get on with it. In some ways, that will help, won't it?
Yeah, massively. And I think, in some ways, actually, because the cricket comes so thick and fast, they won't have overly processed now, and they're going to be on a plane mostly around the island games. The key squad will fly out, and then you're into it. You're in a different country, in a different, completely different space where you can switch off, which I think definitely will help. And you're right that you don't want to take in too much. I'm really grateful I didn't play in the era where social media existed. I was on it, but no one was tweeting me about my game. Not saying that's good or bad, but I just wasn't. So yeah, I think in that sense, just staying away from the noise, getting the head down, focusing will be simple, and ultimately there's still confidence. You do take confidence. So I'm thinking about when we won the T20 and the 50 over in the same year. You do take confidence knowing you won the last one. Doesn't mean that you can rest on your laurels, but it does give you a sense of, we know how to do this, we've been there, you've got an environment and a team and a skill set that's worked. Yes, you might need to tinker with it, but you've got enough that has been able recently to win you a major tournament, and so you can just kind of settle in and focus. So they'll keep things simple. Like you say, they won't be over-engineering like we will be. I'll be with you. I'm on this side now, which is quite fun to get into all the theories, but they'll keep it simple.
Yeah, it's the case across sport, though, isn't it? And particularly when you've got a generation of players that are highly talented. And Gareth Southgate's finding that at the moment. Everyone seems to know better how he should be lining up the England side. Everyone looks at Matthew Mott's England side here and says, well, you should be doing this, this and this. And actually, it's the double-edged sword of a real depth of talent is that there is inevitably a lot of conversation and noise around who should be playing. It was easier in some ways when you knew the 11 because there was that limit, I guess.
Well, yeah, all the World Cups that I played in, it was scraping 11 together rather than trying to leave or having to leave some really talented players out. I just think that there will be noise around Harry Brook because he's had such a good start to his Test career. But as we've talked about a little bit through the T20s and this into this one-day series, the numbers actually back up the other guys that are actually holding their place in the team who are in that squad. And you maybe just have to say, look, Harry Brook's slightly down the pecking order at the minute, and he'll have to wait for his chance, sort of thing. That's the nature of sport. Sometimes as good as someone might be, they might just have to wait their turn because of the quality of the players that are in the team in the first place. So I think, they'll. I'm sure Matthew Mott and Jos Buttler have got a real clear idea of what they want in that first World Cup match, the team they want, the players that they'll want to pick in that, and they'll be just hoping that everyone's fit when they get on that plane, so they can pick from the strongest squad they've got.
Well, that's another thing that is in the build-up. I don't think, from my perspective anyway, I played most of my career without a niggle of some sort. I think every professional athlete is managing or trying to keep an area of their body in order, and so fitness is actually something that is key. Recovery, planning out your workload, working with the behind the support staff to make sure that you're a well-oiled machine. And so that is another element that is actually really vital. Some players, it looks like Ben Stokes, as I saw him even the other day going down to pick up in the last ODI. Some you just know you got something. It's just get through. There is nothing more than that. With my back, it was always just get through this 6 weeks or get through the 4 weeks and then patch it up on the other side. So players will also have to work around their body. The team will be aware usually of that as well, and then you just got to do your best to, one, stay as sharp and fit as you can, and then the other is manage whatever you need to manage throughout that to peak at the right time.
Yeah, and those are the challenges, aren't they? It is making sure that you get the balance right between picking the strongest squad in terms of numbers and ability, the strongest squad in terms of cohesion and all of those things, and then also bearing in mind it's a long tournament and who's the injury risk. I mean, there's so many elements, and to a degree there'll be an element of luck to that as well.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think that is a slight worry for me at the minute. You see Bairstow missing the last game with a shoulder niggle, I think. So you just don't want people going into tournaments with niggles. We obviously know the issues that Ben Stokes has got with his knee. He won't be bowling, I don't think, in the World Cup. I'd be very surprised if he does. So that's again brings a different issue to the team.
Jason Roy
with his back spasm the other day. You'd think that's just a few days and back fit. And then you've got the bowlers who, there's always going to be, as you said, some sort of niggles with the bowlers. And with 9 group games in India on tough pitches, it'll be a real slog for them, and I think they'll need to get managed through that. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's sort of little changes here and there during that World Cup group phase. But yeah, it's something that it's just part and parcel. You've got to hope, but just keep your fingers crossed that you get the 15 guys that you want on that plane.
Do you think England know up there in the dressing room, they know their best 11?
Yeah.
It will vary game to game, I know, but do you think they've got an idea?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the job of a coach and captain, really. Players these days know their own games, they can work out, but you just want to look at the combination as a senior person and say, this is what I think is going to work. By now they would have had a good feel. They might be tinkering with a few ideas. But genuinely, I think in the last few games and going into that World Cup, they will know what they think will work. And then it will be about managing those other small things. Is it extra turning wicket? Do we end up playing an extra spinner? Or is it, a bit more pace on this? So shall we go for the extra seamer? But a general lineup, by now, they will be pretty clear. And then it will be as well fitness managing. So, yeah, I think by now, and that's what a good team does, to be fair, is have a good idea of it and then have the flexibility or adaptability to not get overly rooted to a plan and have enough sort of flexibility to say, look, something's just throwing up a little bit, let's adjust today. And you need your squad, actually. And I think this is one thing I would say it's taught me a lot about life, actually, is being a player who... if you're not playing in a 11 and you're running the drinks, you could have the most sour of faces, and that can affect the whole team. I've been in teams where if you're not picked on that day, someone can let you know that they're upset about their performance, they're not picked, and that affects the group. So actually, I learnt a lot from not being on the side sometimes, but actually part of my job is to make sure this whole engine works, and good coaches and good captains as well, so that if you do get dropped for that day, you're not sulking and you're not dragging the group down. You're actually part of this whole mission, and you have to buy into that whole thing.
Yeah, you can't have a player doing that.
No, not at all. But that, I mean, I sulked through most of that 2010 T20 World Cup, and we won it. Didn't have an effect on the team. So.
Did they just leave you to it?
I just going back to the do they know their strongest team? I think that they'll have a really good idea, and I think it'll just be conditions in India that will be the last couple of little spots up for grabs. I think the top 5 or 6 pretty much picks itself. The question mark would be, do you play Milan and Root 3 and 4? If not, I'd say you want Bairstow and Roy opening if they're fit. Root 3, Stokes 4, Butler 5. See, it's a really strong top 5 for me, that. And then you've got the sort of, then I think the bowling is probably where they might not be as sure. I think Woakes is nailed on. He's been our best one-day bowler for some time.
Rashid and Ali.
Rashid. Does Moeen and Livingston, do you need both of them at 6 or 7 in the batting order? Again, it will be conditions dependent, I think. For me, I want to see Sam Curran in there. I think he's got something. He's just a special player. He's got something really exciting about him that he always does something when he comes on to bowl or with the bat. He's got a good record in India. I think he had a good IPL certainly last year. So I think he's someone that they might want to look at. I know Topley's done well, but going on the other day at Cardiff, I thought Topley and Willie were probably the 2 weaker points of that bowling attack. And then you've got I think you need a pace option in there. England would want it to be Mark Wood, but how many games he'll get through, especially in that group stage, I think he's got to be managed through it, just with his injury record and history. So that potentially is where Gus Atkinson comes in as well. Just those two, maybe swapping in and out. But yeah, I think I'd say the bowling is probably the thing that they might not be 100% sure on just yet.
Yeah, which makes sense. That as you say, that top 5 is very settled, and all the talk about Harry Brook and everything else, it's probably really annoying if you're in that dressing room, because you're sick of all of these conversations, and very tough for him as well, because he's trying to make his way and state his game. He'll want to be there. Yeah,
look, it's tough for him. He's in a good era of English cricket, so it's going to be tricky. I also thought he looked conservative in that last ODI game, which may mean he's thinking about it, and it almost looked like I thought he was trying to give himself a chance, almost just saying don't go too hard too early. But then actually maybe that goes against his own natural ability, and he just didn't find flow. But you have to accept it. He has to accept it. Also, the other thing is he has to be ready, because if one of those injuries that we've seen in Roy or Bairstow does persist, who knows if he's getting on a flight or knocking around to be in there. So he's going to have to just stay focused and be ready at all times.
What about that 2015 and 2011 World Cups? What did England get wrong in those tournaments and going into those tournaments specifically? Don't say how long have we got, Andy?
Yeah, when's that rain stopping?
But can you look at things and think, right, that's probably, compared to what we've had since, that's what we didn't quite get right?
Yeah, I think particularly, 11 I thought, that was pretty much our strongest one-day side. 15, you probably look at it and look at the people that were in the team and think maybe that's, it just showed what style of cricket we were playing at that time. We went fairly conservative with the players. There was no real, what's the word? I guess, exciting batting at the top. There wasn't that excess pace with the ball. We went pretty conservative on both sides, and I think thinking back to our plans, certainly in 15, it was a case of, right, we'll try and not lose wickets in the power play, and then we'll try and tick along to the 40th over and then try and score 100 off the last 10. That was our sort of game plan, which just is so different to how the team approaches it now, or has done since then. It's just baffles really the mind. Do
you look back and think, why were we like that?
Yeah, I guess you also have to play to the strengths of the team that you've got, and we were pretty heavily backloaded in that middle order, I think, with the bat. And then with the ball, it was a case of trying to just bowl almost test match sort of lengths and stuff with the new ball and try and take wickets if we could. And then we didn't really have anyone that was amazing at the death, because we didn't really practice it, because we were all test players, and as I said, we going straight from one test series into a one-day series, you don't have time to practice those skills that you need for one-day cricket as much as you probably need to. And I think that's the great thing about having blocks of cricket, the 100 and no other cricket going on, that people can practice those skills. And having that slight separation in squads as well, having different personnel, allows people that time to practice the skills you need to be world class at this format. And I think that's something that we just didn't really do.
which Salts would have.
That's why we didn't qualify for any of the World Cups. We didn't get through the group stage in one, I don't think.
Although heroically kept the tournaments exciting through some strategic losses for the good of the game. But I mean, England had quite a bit of success playing that old-fashioned, slightly old-fashioned way, very close to winning the 2013 Champions Trophy. But then over the 2 years between that tournament and the 2015 World Cup, there had been quite a pronounced shift in how most teams had played, partly because they changed the regulations on how many fielders you could have out from the 10th over onwards. So we'd seen a lot of the highest scores. We had Rohit Sharma getting a 250 in a one-dayer, and England just seemed late to react to that change. And then so I mean, the players that didn't go to that World Cup, Stokes didn't go, Jason Roy had been doing pretty well in county cricket, didn't go, and they came into the side after that. Hales was in the squad but only came in late in that tournament, didn't you? So I think Butler was batting down at 7. So it just felt that England reacted to the changing nature of ODI cricket later than other teams.
Yeah, that definitely felt like the case. I think we were always playing catch-up. We were always just trying to keep up with the other teams, with Australia, with India, even New Zealand, Sri Lanka. I remember New Zealand and Sri Lanka dealt with us in Wellington. Sangakkara got runs and McCullum smashed us around the ground as well. So it was... we were always playing catch up, and then that real shift came in 15, getting those players. And I think it was we had briefly touched on data and stats. I think that was heavily loaded towards strike rates and trying to get people in that had the ability to score quickly and in certain periods of the game. And we've seen that just we went from, as I said, following to being world leaders in space of a couple of years.
Yeah, and it's amazing, isn't it, Ev? You spoke about how that day where you scored the runs that should have won you the game, and then I mean, actually, ethos ahead of data can be so much more significant, and the way that England's women approached the Ashes this year, England's men have approached white ball cricket since 2015. All of these shifts that you can see make such a huge difference on the field, and actually data kind of goes out the window.
Yeah, look, I think, being really honest, there's nothing that buys you in anything more than purpose. Like the bigger picture, why are we doing it? Are we up for it? And someone could come in and tell you the plan and the data. If Martin Luther King said that, and I know this is a corny thing to say, but if Martin Luther King would have said, I have a plan, no one would have rocked up. But he said, I have a dream. And so I think what ends up happening is you have to sell a bit more of what are we doing? Let's go out, express ourselves, play with fun, make things happen and enjoy it. And if you've got a leader, captain, why are you smiling at me?
Just because I never saw that coming.
Sorry, I've used it a few times.
I totally get it.
And actually the reason, I'm saying, I caught up with Keezy the other day, and we were just talking about just the big picture of what the Bazball mindset means, and we were talking about these things. So it's, as much as it might sound a bit motivational speech on the radio today, it is important that the tone is what players play for, the environment is what players play for. If it gets too sounding boring and like a robotic plan, we all get turned off. Ultimately you play cricket because you want to have fun.
Yeah, I think enjoyment's the massive thing. You've got to enjoy what you do out in the middle, because there's so much pressure, or can be so much pressure around a high-performance team that you need to alleviate that, and enjoyment's the massive thing. And just going back to that 15 World Cup, was a perfect example of sometimes plans not floating people's boats. I mentioned in the power play, first 10, we wanted to not lose wickets, and Moeen Ali in Wellington got out on the 60th ball of the innings, the last ball of the power play, and got a dressing down when he got into the changing rooms. So for him, that's just the way he plays, though. He wanted to enjoy himself, and he was being sort of restricted.
But had he
wasn't
got
allowed
later, it would have been seen as less.
Well, according to the plan, it would have been okay.
Exactly. I just think that was just an example of a player being sort of confined and not being allowed to play with the. He's blessed with so much natural talent. He's so amazing to watch when he's in form. One of the best players we've had, I think, certainly in one-day cricket. And I love watching him play. And you want to see players like that be allowed to go out and entertain.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting point, isn't it? That if you are a cricketer that is, naturally exuberant and wants to go and perform, wants to go and play, you can see so clearly the Bazball effect on some of those players that perhaps weren't as successful as they are now because of that ethos that he has, and similarly the Owen Morgan, Trevor Bayliss effect. And it feels so straightforward, but it is just a slight shift in mindset.
Yeah, I think also the other is I think it does bring the fans along with you. You know, you think about after the 2015 team revolutionised, you think about the Bazball era, you think about how the women played this summer. If the players are looking like they're enjoying themselves and they're out to entertain and keep crowds engaged, the support behind you feels that. Don't get me wrong, I know as fans that we chip away and the broadcasters will, but actually you bring people along with you. And that makes it easier to continue to play that sort of style. So even though this stuff is not quite tangible, you know, it actually is mostly the most important stuff. It's like, why am I here and why am I doing it? Well, I'm here to do it, entertain, have fun, live with a bit of pride. And that's what a World Cup is about, really. You're representing your country, bringing pride, but also you're there to entertain.
And what about this England squad going into the World Cup? I mean, Jimmy, you know a lot of those players from the Test side. There's so much cricket, as we always talk about. I mean, how energised, ready, excited do you think they are to get out to India and defend this title?
Yeah, I think they'll, you know, as I said, I don't think this series is too important in terms of how England will do in the World Cup. I think once they get there, that experience, you know, the hunger will be there, the desire, the want to defend their title, I think will definitely be there. Guys have had rests at different times this summer. I know there's been a lot of cricket, but I've seen the Test guys, Ben Stokes, Johnny Bairstow, Joe Root, have all gone. They've got away after the Ashes. They didn't go straight into the 100, so they've had breaks at times to be able to be fresh when they get out to India. And I think, as I said, it's you just, for a big tournament, you find that extra bit of, even if you are feeling a bit flat or a bit tired, you find that extra bit because you're at a World Cup representing your country. It's just, you know, the biggest thing that you can do as a player. So you do find that extra bit. I don't think you know, fatigue or tiredness will really come into it. I think it might be a different story, you know, if all the guys, or certainly the Test players that play in the World Cup, if they then play the Tests in India, which is a 2-month tour in the new year, and then potentially go on to the IPL, which is another 2 and a bit months in India. I'll be 6 months away from home, 6 months in India over the winter. I think that'll be a long stint. And at some point maybe they're just going to have to, something's going to have to give, and they're going to have to manage their way through it a little bit. Yeah, but I think for now, absolutely fine.
They're up for it and ready to go. And how do you keep on feeling like that? And they did it brilliantly in 2019 because they lost games, put pressure on themselves. How do you keep smiling? How do you keep enjoying it? That's the other challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I think winning's going to help. Let's keep it simple. If you're going through group stages and things are clicking, even if it's not perfect, but you're seeing progress, I think that helps, because ultimately as a player, like, when you're performing and when you're at your best and you're enjoying your cricket, that's when it's great. It's when those things aren't together. So I think they're going to go out, have I think they should do well. We're expecting them to get to the final stages. You know, we're possibly going to see India in the mix. South Africa's shaping up all right. So, you know, there'll be some good teams in there, but they're going in with the best possible chances.
I'm rather worried about Australia, who look quite
Australia,
good.
Yeah.
David Warner levelled with... I think Sachin Tendulkar in terms of 100 scored by openers yesterday. Got his 45th 100, and he looks in rather good touch as well. So the Australian side are going to be good.
Yeah, the scores from that game yesterday in Bloemfontein, Australia made a 392 for 8. They were on course for an even bigger score than that after a blazing start. Travis Head 64 off 36, Warner 106 off 93, Marnus Labuschagne back in the side 124 off 99. Then South Africa 269 all out. Here was a stat from yesterday's game. Quinton de Kock 45, Bavuma 46, Henrik Klaassen and David Miller 49 each, 4 scores of 45, no 50s in the innings. That's only the third time that a team has had 4 players reach 45 and them all be out before scoring 50 in the entire history of
wow.
men's international and domestic
So
cricket.
what makes me laugh about Zoltz, there are many things, even sometimes when he's trying, sometimes when he's not, is that he came in this morning to the box, and I hadn't seen the result yesterday. He said there's been a brilliant game between Australia and South Africa. I was like, oh, was it close? He said, no, it wasn't close, but you should see this stat.
I love Zoltz. He always it's the excitement before he can deliver the
I
stat.
know.
That's his peak life.
I love it. Right, Ebony, thank you very much indeed, and I will remember that quote. Thank you very much. I enjoyed that.